And I think most folks have dropped in, so I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Division 46 of the American Psychological Association, the Society for Media, Psychology, and Technology. My name is Christian Aloma. I am the current past president of Division 46, and I'm excited to introduce you all to today's topic and our speakers. But first, a couple of housekeeping items. One, this presentation is being recorded and it will be published to our YouTube channel for everyone, both on this email as well as those that are members of the division and the public as well. If you would like to ask the presenter a question, you can please put your question in the Q&A button. There should be one at the bottom of the webinar there. You can drop that there, drop your questions there. I will keep track of those so that at the end of the presentation, we'll try to make sure as many of those questions can get addressed in the time that we have allowed. Now, the Q&A is very different from the chat. I don't know if the chat is even turned on, but it's really helpful if you can drop those questions into the Q&A. Now, as a reminder, this is a webinar, so you all do not have the ability to turn on your microphones or turn on your camera, so you can sit back and relax and enjoy the content. And we really do hope you are able to sort of engage and share your comments and questions via that Q&A with our team here. Now, the topic of today's webinar is TikTok and self-diagnosis, the influence of social media on adolescent and young adult mental health. We are joined today by Dr. Mina Nguyen-Driver, by Dr. Mara Whiteside, and Dr. Amy Seay. They are all faculty from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and they're bringing extensive expertise in pediatric psychology and neuropsychology. Dr. Mina Nguyen-Driver is a clinical psychologist and professor of pediatrics with more than 20 years of experience providing behavioral and mental health care for children, adolescents, and families, and is actively involved in training future psychologists. Dr. Mara Whiteside is a board-certified pediatric neuropsychologist and associate professor of pediatric whose work spans clinical care, research, and training with a focus on pediatric neuropsychological assessment for children with complex medical histories. And Dr. Amy Seay is a pediatric psychologist and associate professor of pediatrics who provides behavioral health consultation and treatment for children with complex medical and emotional needs, and is actively engaged in leadership and advocacy at the state and national levels. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll pass it over to our wonderful trio of doctors here who will take us through today's session.
Great, thank you so much, Christian. Welcome everybody. It's really cool to see some familiar names on the participants list here. Thanks so much for showing up and being here with us. So again, we're going to be talking about TikTok and self-diagnosis and how the influence of social media on adolescent young adult mental health has just been prolific in this area. So my colleagues and I, Dr. Whiteside and Dr. Seay, we're really excited to talk with you today about a very, very timely topic that's becoming increasingly relevant in clinical education and even household conversations too, which is how TikTok and other short-form videos platforms are influencing adolescents and young adult mental health. Just a little bit of self-disclosure. My husband and I, we have 2 adolescents at home. And so we very much talk about TikTok and short-form videos and how much they influence their thoughts and the behavior, sometimes even emotions as well. And so just note too that when we talk about TikTok, we're not only just talking about TikTok, we're talking about all short form videos. So platforms like Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, Snapchat, and etc. is what we're referring to. Just TikTok just happens to be a more catchy name. And so that's what we named our talk as this. Next slide, please. Thank you to Division 46 today, the Society for Media, Psychology, and Technology for having us here today. Thank you so much. Students can join for free. So my colleagues and I are clinicians and practitioners, and I think that's something that we really want to clarify. So we're not researchers, we're clinicians in the field, we have boots on the ground, and we're located in Northwest Arkansas at a developmental center called Schmedding Developmental Center. And we're located at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. And what we do are mainly autism evaluations and behavioral health. There's a lot of diversity in our Northwest region, and our center is the only developmental center in the region. So many local and rural community pediatricians refer us for evaluations all the time. And we're often seen as the regional experts when it comes to developmental, behavioral health, and autism. And like many centers across the country, we've seen a dramatic rise in demand of pediatric mental health services. Once intake paper is submitted by our families, our families currently wait about 18 months to about 2 years to be seen, and our wait list continues to grow. Next slide, please. So it's TikTok and Instagram reels such as these that have had significant increased demand for evaluations and referrals to our clinic. Can you hit it again?
I just watched Percy Jackson and I'm convinced I have ADHD.
High masking folks until it is more widely understood and better known by more professionals. Autism self-diagnosis is completely valid.
Hi there, I am Destiny K, and I am pro-educated self-diagnosis, and this is a safe space for you guys, because I know how difficult it can be to get a diagnosis.
So according to these videos that I picked up on TikTok, we're seeing an increase in self-diagnosis and mental health conversations online. I will say that some of these videos can actually be very helpful, and then some can actually be very harmful. So in our presentation today, we're going to discuss how these platforms shapes self-diagnosis trends, the impact of mental health awareness, and what that means for us who work with adolescent and young adults in the mental health world. I will say that many parents and youth cite videos like these when they're seeking an evaluation. So they'll be coming in and they'll say, hey, I saw this video on YouTube. This explains who I am. This really means a lot to me. Also, content creators often use psychological terms without any sort of clinical training whatsoever. They're talking about their own lived experience. And this contributes to the increased concerns and confusion that families have when they come in to see us. Next slide, please. So the objectives for our presentation today is we're going to analyze what the current data is out there. So Dr. Whiteside is going to do a really nice review of the current data. We're going to evaluate the risks and benefits and potential benefits of this content. And then we're going to discuss strategies for addressing these challenges across homeschool and the clinical setting. So go ahead and put into your question and answer comment box here. Before we dive in, we'd love to hear from you. And so over the past year, have you encountered any clients or patients who have used social media as a source for self-diagnosis? And if yes, what diagnosis did the client indicate they reported having? And if you're a parent on this and not a clinician, same thing, like over the past year, have you heard from your child or friends, adolescents, other adults that have used social media as a source for self-diagnosis? And then what diagnosis did they report having? Okay. I'm going to look at the chat here. So it looks like maybe some of you guys haven't had this experience yet. Maybe you are here to learn and hear more about what's going on. So if you are thinking about it, go ahead and put that in. Oh, looks like somebody here has reported that ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, sociopath, narcissism is a huge thing that we hear quite a bit. And of course, rejection sensitivity. Yeah, these are all real, very real diagnoses. We'll get into more of the details about how do we go about, when we hear about these from our own family members or other adults or our clients, how do we go about approaching the situation? PDA. Yeah. So from Q&A, I've heard of self-diagnosis based on multiple platforms of information from TikTok specifically. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, it sounds like it. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Whiteside. Thank you.
Okay, so like Dr. Nguyen-Driver said, I'm going to go over the stats and content of what researchers have found out about TikTok as it relates to mental health and self-diagnosing. I'll follow it up with talking about how the algorithm impacts the way a viewer interprets their experience. So these headlines might look a little familiar. It doesn't take much effort to find a recent headline pointing out about how TikTok is resulting in some new trend. Over the past few years, there's been a growing media narrative about how adolescents and young adults turn to TikTok for answers about their mental health. So YouTube is my brain rot of choice, and I have found so many videos, long form content compiling TikTok videos and providing that snarky commentary about what the videos contain. These are a few of the top videos that came up on my YouTube, so with my algorithm, when I type in TikTok and self-diagnosis. And I've watched a few in my spare time, and these commentators are always like poking holes in the process of self-diagnosis and pointing out the misinformation in it. So why are young people diagnosing themselves from videos? One hypothesis that gets mentioned in the research is that there's a lack of access to services. APA has published information regarding the lack of services for young people, and we know that young people's mental health worsened over the course of the pandemic. It's no wonder that these kids and these young adults are turning to whatever information source they have for answers about how they are feeling. And while we don't really know the numbers regarding how many people are diagnosing themselves with the condition, I think it's clear to a lot of us who are clinicians working with adolescents and young adults that TikTok is a major source of their mental health information. So in fact, 63% of American teenagers use TikTok daily, and that's nearly 2 out of 3 teenagers on the platform each day. Young adults are not that far behind. 59% of adults under 30 years old are using TikTok every day. And these numbers do not account for the rest of the population who might be using TikTok less frequently than daily. We also know that TikTok is more than just entertainment. TikTok is often seen as a news source for adolescents and young adults. And this has become especially true in light of our political climate and how the public views traditional news sources. TikTok has also been used for unfiltered documentation of events such as protests and conflict zones. Many adolescents and young adults are using TikTok as a search engine rather than Google, and is increasingly used as a behavioral health information source. The defining feature of TikTok is the For You page, that stream of videos driven by the platform's algorithm. The algorithm's job is to keep users on the platform for longer periods of time, and the most effective way to do that is to show users what they want to see. Adolescents are vulnerable to the steady stream of information. And honestly, like, I'm going to confess here, I used to have a TikTok. I created it during the pandemic and followed all sorts of epidemiologists and political commentators, and I would be on that app for hours and hours at night. So much so that TikTok was sending me that video that says like, hey, you've been on here for too long. Have you thought about getting off? It was very addictive, and I was a very passive user. Didn't comment on videos, didn't make a video, just kind of liked my favorites and kept scrolling. And I think that's good to keep in mind because I'm a fully grown woman. I have pretty good executive functioning. I have knowledge of reward systems. And if I struggled to put that app down, I know that other people are also struggling, especially our teenagers and young adults. So I'm going to present some of the research published about TikTok and mental health content. I'm going to cover a couple kind of big areas. And before we start, I want to say there's a lot of good descriptive studies coming out that shed light on what is actually released on the platform. Many of these studies could use some replication. Most are very recent. It's a growing field, can get really overwhelming to keep up with all the new research coming out. So to start off, hashtag mental health, very broad, potentially encompasses a wide range of topics. Of the 100 most viewed videos, only one was created by a healthcare professional. Healthcare professional is someone who has credentials to educate on the topic, such as a license or degree in the field. 13 videos were created by influencers. And an influencer is a person with a large following that promotes certain topics or goods, and they may have sponsorships. 84 were consumer generated, and a consumer is a user of TikTok who does not fit the category of a professional or influencer. The other 2 videos were created by a television-based entertainer and a news organization. So not a lot of representation from healthcare professionals on the very broad mental health hashtag. And mental health content is so pervasive online that a new patient coming in for their first session is likely to have some sort of exposure to information on social media, and probably as a result, likely to already have an idea about what diagnosis they have. There's also evidence that watching mental health content online can lead to harmful content, particularly content about eating disorders and suicide being pushed through that algorithm. In terms of autism, we see a mix of helpful and unhelpful content. 41% of the most viewed hashtag autism content were inaccurate. Of note, these researchers looked into the mean number of views and likes for inaccurate, overgeneralized, and accurate videos. And in their analysis, there was no significant difference between the three groups. There were differences between the creators of videos. Videos created by healthcare professionals were more likely to be accurate than videos created by autistic creators and non-healthcare professionals. There was no difference in accuracy between autistic creators and non-healthcare professionals. Hey, looking at ADHD and the study of 100 most viewed hashtag ADHD videos on TikTok, 11 of those were created by healthcare professionals. The other 89 were by non-healthcare professionals. And of note, none of the videos were by organizations. 52% of the ADHD videos in the study were misleading. The majority of those misleading videos cited transdiagnostic criteria as exclusive to ADHD. Other misleading videos incorrectly discussed pathophysiology of ADHD, provided incorrect information about that diagnostic procedures of ADHD, or misattribution of theories to ADHD. My favorite that I saw in the paper was about ADHD folks not having object permanence. So a lot of just misattribution of theories or misunderstanding of theories getting perpetuated on the platform. Other misleading examples included ADHD paralysis and that ADHD is related to being only under or overstimulated. Personal experience types of videos include the day in the life, what did I do today, kind of vlogging, and showed a lot of the difficulty with following through with tasks. Trauma is increasingly used as an explanation for a wide range of normal behaviors. Behaviors like people-pleasing, perfectionism, decision paralysis, lashing out, doom scrolling, rewatching favorite shows, all of these have been explained by the viewer's trauma response. What's missing from these assumptions is what trauma actually is. And in looking at hashtag trauma videos, 60% of these videos described personal experiences by the platform users. These videos are often confessional, related to their personal experience, and or awareness raising. 10% of trauma videos were created by healthcare professionals, 20% by alternative providers, such as life coaches, and 10% were created by influencers. Most of the trauma videos that are about personal experience describe normal behaviors as responses to trauma. Videos that frame normal behaviors as trauma response suggest to the viewer that they have some sort of uncovered trauma that is causing their perfectionism or people-pleasing behavior. Another issue seen with trauma videos is a lack of content warnings or appropriate tags so that users who are sensitive to the trauma can avoid the content. And TikTok-induced tics is like so fascinating to me. We had like this huge upsurge in functional tic disorders with the introduction of TikTok. Research shows that there's an increase in disorders, especially during COVID-19, that was inconsistent with previous trends. The presentations of these tics were also atypical. A lot of these first-time tic disorders were occurring in adolescent women, and the tics were much more complex than a typical trajectory. Clinicians and researchers discovered that these tic patterns were imitative of popular video content. On TikTok, the videos showcasing the more atypical tics and Tourette's conditions got more views than simple motor or vocal tics. For those diagnosed with a functional tic disorder, about 77% of those patients reported watching social media videos featuring tic disorders prior to the onset of their tic behaviors. And finally, I want to touch on dissociative identity disorder. DID is very rare, very serious condition. And when I started this review, it didn't even occur to me that there would be DID content on TikTok. There are creators who talk about their systems, and that can be very important for them in their own mental health. But as we see with these other conditions, young people are not getting the quality information about the disorder and in turn are misunderstanding some of the key features. An analysis of 97 TikTok videos regarding DID, only 5 were found to be useful. The researchers define useful as including accurate information about DID. 10 videos were misleading, which is basically the opposite of useful. And the rest were neither useful nor misleading. These videos that are neither can include content about personal experiences, comedy, art, discussions, interviews, and the like. So 2 terms that came up in my review of current research are the Barnum effect and confirmation bias. these two are very important for us to keep in mind when we're thinking about how teens interact with TikTok and other social media platforms. They are looking for themselves in the content, and they are interacting with the videos that confirm their prior beliefs. As a result, prolonged use of TikTok and other video platforms with algorithm feeds create this echo chamber for the user. And as we know, frequent exposure to something leads us to believe that it's more common than it actually is. If you watch a lot of trauma content, suddenly everything is trauma related. A complicating factor here is the likes and views that these videos rack up. Adolescents and young adults see how popular some mental health videos are, and they see the sympathy and comments that are attached to these videos. And there's this thought process that these behaviors are desirable. It reminds me of like the sad girl Tumblr era that I lived through, where there was all this aesthetic pictures and this melancholic vibe around kind of depression, sadness, and the like. For video creators, the algorithm pushes videos that are engaging. Videos that support a viewer's worldview gets pushed. Videos that lead to engagement, including negative engagement, get pushed. And if a creator wants their video to gain traction, they have to create content that the people want to see. So to sum it up, we see that there's evidence that videos featuring personal experience with behavioral health get the highest engagement. Related, there are far more non-healthcare professionals creators in the TikTok space than healthcare professional creators. These videos are not substantially different in terms of views, likes, or comments. So can adolescents and young adults distinguish between a reputable and non-reputable source? Not to mention we're in an era that is devaluing higher education and degrees and licenses in online spaces. There's a debate about who can speak authoritatively on the subject of mental health. Those with degrees and licenses in mental health are seen as gatekeeping information about mental health when we try to limit what non-healthcare professionals can promote on their channels. Misinformation is often the norm rather than the exception, and TikTok's algorithm can push unhealthy content to its users. So I want to leave you with a quote. This came from Teen Vogue, and Teen Vogue's pretty awesome, by the way, on their article about self-diagnosis. Even if you aren't seeking out mental health symptoms on social media, the algorithm may give them to you anyway.
Okay, so I'm Amy Seay, and I'm a pediatric psychologist and colleagues of Dr. Whiteside and Dr. Nguyen-Driver. And while we're all clinicians, I'm based at the local children's hospital and primarily provide behavioral health consultation services in the outpatient specialty clinics and some ongoing therapy with school-age children with acute and/or chronic medical conditions, in addition to some emotional and/or behavioral health difficulties. I feel like I've got the easy job today discussing the risks and benefits of short form videos and reels with regard to behavioral health diagnoses and intervention. So let's get to it. Click. Using TikTok and other types of short form videos and reels to self-diagnose behavioral health issues and address behavioral health needs is, like with anything else, bound to come with risks in addition to the benefits that should be considered. Click. While some have argued that the benefits are limited and that the risks significantly outweigh the benefits, we're just beginning to understand the influence and impact of these platforms, and a further review and continued discussion of the risks and benefits is likely why our talk was accepted at APA and why we're giving this talk again today, so that we can make informed decisions with regard to the utilization and overall value of these platforms. Next slide. So overall, what we found and what we'd like to discuss with you today is, click. While highly visualized platforms with reels and other short form videos like TikTok can provide a sense of validation and community for individuals with behavioral health issues, especially those who are isolated, may have limited information, and may feel misunderstood, the information provided may not be accurate or complete, may be sensationalized for likes and views, and significant misinformation, specifically if it leads to misdiagnosis, can be harmful. Next slide. So what's the consensus with regard to risks and benefits? In terms of benefits, we want to say that TikTok and other short form video platforms can provide a sense of community, support, and shared experience for individuals who are struggling with their emotional and behavioral functioning. and may be very much needed for those who feel that they're misunderstood or isolated, or that they're struggling on their own. Spreading information about behavioral health is important, right? We talk about the dissemination factor and how important it is with regard to psychological science all the time. It's why we publish, it's why we create educational content, it's why we do trainings, it's why we teach. Getting information about behavioral health diagnoses and evidence-based intervention and supports can help increase awareness and normalize behavioral health issues and normalize the treatment of behavioral health issues. And doesn't G.I. Joe say knowing is half the battle? Well, validating and normalizing the experiences of others can help individuals who are struggling and not know what's going on with them or what to do. It can make them feel less alone and help them feel understood that there are different options with regard to treating issues that they now have a name or label for. Individuals who are struggling with behavioral health issues have really turned to these short form video platforms to express themselves, to let some of the things that they've kept in or don't feel comfortable or able to share in their private lives out on a whole nother level, one without direct negative feedback or backlash or the immediate consequences that can come with being yourself IRL. I've referenced TikTok videos or reels that are trending in the moment in therapy, maybe to get cred or to start a conversation in a more approachable way or within limits, and or like a delicate dance, trying to talk to adolescents in their own language to provide or obtain information that's relevant and or acceptable to them. Maybe use generational slang, language, or referencing a recipe that's all the rage, which, by the way, is a phrase of speech I'm going to use here in this presentation in front of you all, but would definitely not use within the context of talking to a teen, as I would no doubt be quickly outed as one who is not alpha or sigma, or maybe even, oh, the horror, thought of as a boomer or unk. I do this when I'm trying to provide recommendations to teens and families in clinic as well. I try to offer handouts and information that include website references or mobile health apps for things like guided relaxation videos or apps for tracking migraines, medications, or bowel movements. And websites with great filters like those can filter out behavioral health providers in one's community who do not accept one's insurance when I'm trying to help individuals access or establish ongoing therapy if I'm recommending it. These videos and reels provide a lot of food for fodder, and while they say no publicity is bad publicity, and videos can start conversations, even if it is to address misinformation or correct assumptions that are out there that might need to be corrected, if we don't know what teens are consuming, we can't do this. By placing information about behavioral health on TikTok and other video platforms, we're better able to know what's out there and have a finger on the pulse with regard to the current teen zeitgeist. Next slide. So as Paul Harvey says, and now the rest of the story, and in no certain order, we should probably get into the potential costs or limitations of these platforms. Click. So if knowing is half the battle, knowing is good, right? Well, maybe not if the content is sensationalized for likes and subscribes or clicks that can turn into dollars, or to further the agenda of the individual who very much has their sights on one day being plucked out of their quiet little corner or space on the web, who's finally found that special formula and their video has gone viral and they're now internet famous. What I want to put out there is that there is perhaps secondary gain that may be at play when people are creating and publishing content for others to view on these type of platforms. If information has been sensationalized, so to speak, or there's misinformation that is spread faster than anyone can actually do anything about, information that cannot be policed or contained, that this type of information can very much amplify worry or fear related to certain behavioral health issues. Misinformation can result in unnecessary anxiety or distress as opposed to a more clear understanding of behavioral health issues or needs, especially for parents or caregivers of teens, parents who may have concerns of their own and turn to videos and reels to find information that may reinforce a negative belief or that exacerbates an already difficult to navigate conversation with their teen or even a potential treatment provider if one is accessed. Click. Video with the content and the projection of certain image that content creators, influencers, or companies that pay to have access to the followers of those creators put together in order to market to certain populations, those are put out there for all to see and can be idealized images or narratives. And this image or narrative can cause comparisons and can engender or highlight potential feelings of inadequacy and can negatively impact self-esteem. They can potentially lead others to think that perhaps by comparison, their behavioral health issues are not as big of a deal or are not as significant and therefore do not warrant a diagnosis or intervention, or even just the negative thoughts or feelings those suffering from behavioral health difficulties have, which can then inadvertently worsen their existing symptoms or issues. Click. So like Dr. Whiteside has brought up, some research suggests that exposure to certain content on platforms or utilization of the platform's algorithms can cause disproportionate exposure to certain kinds of content, or the prevalence of exposure to idealized or sensationalized images and or narratives, or just exposure to certain content can trigger or increase symptoms of depression and anxiety, especially in vulnerable populations or users. The amplification of symptoms can lead individuals feeling worse or perceiving more intense or frequent symptoms that they may have without this type of exposure. Maybe it's a way to identify with a group or to foster a sense of belonging or identity during a stage of identity formation or the development of oneself. Teens are going to go through so many changes and are considered much more susceptible and more easily influenced due to their lack of a fully formed sense of self and a desire to please or fit in and to not look different or to garner potential disapproval in any way. Their brains are made for this, or I should say, their brains are made for developing and fostering relationships and identity based on approval and attention and engagement within the context of their peer group. But when the brain, with all of its adolescent brain chemistry, is exposed to instant social gratification, perceptions can be skewed, and identification based on a desire to fit in rather than actual constellation of symptoms, then subsequent acceptance and praise from those trying to provide or foster support can perpetuate a self-assigned label or diagnosis. Social contagion or self-diagnosis of certain behavioral health disorders or symptoms in particular, to include eating disorders and Tourette's syndrome, especially among teen girl users, has been highlighted. Perhaps it's because of this group's increased susceptibility, or is potentially related to their strong desire to fit in or to gain social cred online, that social contagion has been posited as a potential underlying factor involved in the increased self-diagnosis and increased presentation of symptoms or risk for developing symptoms within this population. Additionally, the stereotypical nature of some of this content can really lead to increased imitation. Just kind of off note, I do behavioral interventions for tics. And when I'm thinking about people with an identified tic disorder, if they already have tics, just watching TikTok videos, there's a suggestibility to a lot of tic urges that increase the urge when we hear or see these things. So it can be something that we need to monitor when we have actual diagnoses in play and we're trying to be around other people who understand what we're going through as well. So we definitely want to look for diagnoses that may have already been made, and then diagnoses that come about from frequent exposure and some of those more atypical presentations. So when we're looking at the bigger cons, perhaps the biggest costs are with regard to misinformation and misdiagnosis, the delaying of professional diagnoses and treatment, and the potential negative impact that information obtained via short-form videos can have on treatment efficacy and outcomes when behavioral health assistance is accessed. Self-diagnosis based on misinformation or misinterpretation of experiences can result in misdiagnosis. Next. Users of these platforms can be inundated with biased and inaccurate content. This can result in misinterpretation of their experiences and symptoms and can lead to an increased self-diagnosis of behavioral health disorders that they do not actually have, or lead to inaccurate beliefs about the severity or prognosis of issues that they do have. So self-diagnosis and relying on TikTok and other platforms for treatment or a cure of one's self-diagnosed behavioral health issue can delay the seeking of professional help for accurate assessment, diagnosis, and guidance with regard to one's behavioral health. Additionally, self-diagnosis can cause individuals to treat one but not other behavioral health needs if or when comorbidities exist. This can be more problematic for the individual than if their comorbidities had been diagnosed and treated concurrently. Self-diagnosis and an identity based on this perception can result in increased entrenchment or belief that something is what it is and can't be something else, and can lead individuals to just not being open to a diagnosis potentially not being correct, or the idea that something else could be going on, or that additional issues might be at play. It can negatively impact the therapeutic experience or relationship, and it can delay or prevent treatment buy-in, motivation, efficacy, and/or benefits of treatment. Talk about not setting the therapist of a teen up for success. If the therapist is attempting to correct misinformation or misconceptions or misdiagnoses, this can really potentially increase the likelihood that the teen may feel dismissed or invalidated by their therapist. So after discussing some of these risks and benefits in detail, I thought it might be helpful to show some examples that highlight the good and the bad. This first example is one of the examples of the good kinds of information. And in the chat, if you guys want to point out some things that make you feel like it's meeting those markers of good content for behavioral health available on TikTok, I'd love to hear it.
I thought you'd never ask. Okay, so psychiatrist with ADHD here. Let's talk about the actual diagnostic criteria for ADHD. There are two main categories that we think about: inattentive symptoms and hyperactive impulsive symptoms. And you can have a combination of both, or you can have one or the other. Symptoms have to be present for at least 6 months. They can't be caused by any other mental health issue like an episode of depression or severe anxiety, and they have to have been present when the person was a child and in different domains of their life. So it can't just be that they're distracted at school. It has to be like school and home, something like that. And most importantly, these are symptoms that are going to happen to everyone at some point in their life, but if you have ADHD, they are excessive, and it's to the point where these symptoms get in the way of your ability to function. I'll do a part 2 and a part 3 where we talk about what the actual symptoms look like for people with inattentive symptoms and people with hyperactive and impulsive symptoms. I'm going to give you 17 questions that I actually ask my patients when I am assessing them for ADHD. Please keep in mind that you cannot diagnose yourself with ADHD just based on these questions. ADHD symptoms can overlap with a lot of other mental health issues and also with just normal human experience. So if this is something that resonates with you, doesn't automatically mean you have ADHD, just means maybe it's worth talking with your doctor or therapist.
Okay, so if you guys want to put in the chat and we can visit when we're doing the Q&A part, the things that might have stood out with why that's one of those good examples of content for behavioral health out on TikTok. This next video about ADHD, I want you guys to watch and tell me what might stick out to you in regard to characteristics that make this video a real an example of a pretty terrible video about behavioral health available on TikTok, given that what we've discussed in terms of the risks.
People with ADHD do not miss other people. It's a blessing and it's a curse. But those of us with ADHD, we do not miss people. It's out of sight, out of mind. We have what's called object permanence. If you are not in front of us or engaging with us, our brain literally files you away and we forget about you. And we can forget about you for weeks, months, or even years. My wife who committed suicide in 2015, unless I directly think about her, I forget. And it sucks. There's a horrible part of this, but there's also a great superpower to it. When it does come to exes, it comes to people in your life that have hurt you, guess what? You do forget about them. And the scary part, though, and the worst part is when you do start to talk to people, we literally have put time in a capsule. We have forgotten about you. When we start talking to you again, it could be 2 years later, and guess what? That file cabinet opens up, and we go back to talking to you like we talked to you a week ago, 2 days ago. We literally can remember some of these obscure details that you were telling us about, obscure details of your life, and we are able to act, and literally it feels like we have just talked to you, and we forget that it has been a huge gap in time because we forgot about you, but we're able to pick up right where we left off. And it is one of those superpowers with ADHD. It is something that, again, if we're not messaging you and we're not talking to you and you want that engagement with us, that relationship with us, you do have to put the effort forward. And it's not selfishness, it's literally how our brain works. And even if with ADHD, it is setting reminders and focusing on who are important people to keep keep in touch with. I have went times without talking to my parents or my mom for months, and I forget. It's like, when was the last time I talked to her? I'm like, holy crap, it was like 4 months ago, and I have to call her and be like, oh my God, I am so sorry. But that is how our brain works, and it is very normal and natural for us. Those with ADHD, comment down below if you know what I'm talking about, because this is a struggle and a half for us, and it's something that we have to find coping tools for.
So I'm going to give it over to my colleague, Dr. Nguyen-Driver, but I see those comments in the chat. When we have time for the Q&A kind of portion, we can speak to this a little bit more, but in an effort of time, I'm going to pass the baton.
Great, thank you, Amy, appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to give some strategies for parents and caregivers, teachers and school administrators, and also what can we as clinicians do, and then end it with what are these short form platform videos, what is their responsibility as well? So strategies for parents and caregivers. So we know that according to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, teens spend an average about 8.5 hours a day, and that's just an average. So we know that teens can be spending up to 14 to 18 hours, if not even longer, being on their screens. And that includes a combination of social media, gaming, streaming games, and streaming movies, and even school-related use. And I don't know about you guys, but my two kids being in high school, all the kids are given a Chromebook now. Everything is all done on Chromebooks. And so they use their Chromebooks for turning in homework assignments, reading textbooks, class communication. Even parents are now, no papers are coming home. Even permission slips and all that are all done electronically. So even academic demands contribute to screen time totals. Schools increasingly rely on Chromebooks for classwork, homework, and communication, blurring the lines between academic and recreational screen time. I know that for some of my kids too, they'll be doing a research on a paper on their computer, and then all of a sudden they'll see a video on Instagram and they'll start laughing about it. And then 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, now they're watching Instagram and TikTok versus what they were supposed to be doing, which was doing their homework. We also want to make sure that we set screen time boundaries early. So waiting until an adolescent, putting boundaries on them makes it even harder to enforce these limits. Screen time is not just about the amount of time, the quantity, but it's about the quality. So while social media can be educational, much of it is entertainment focused. I know that when I get on TikTok, sometimes it's a dance challenge. Sometimes there's some sort of challenge going on. There's a lot of comedy, music, beauty trends, get ready with me. There's tons of just really fun entertainment things on there. It's just not always all educational. So we want to pursue quality over quantity. We want to make sure that our teens have really good, healthy sleep habits. Teens often cite winding down as a way to for scrolling at night. And we adults, we do that too. Like sometimes in bed, before I go to turn off my lights, I'll be looking at my phone. I might be looking on social media on Facebook and Instagram to see what my friends have been up to or what the community has been doing. And so, that's a way to wind down. Well, teens do that even more so, and they don't often know when to stop. And they recognize it as being like doom scrolling or bed rotting, but they will keep doing that on a Sunday morning if you let them. So we need to be aware of what's called revenge bedtime procrastination, where teens are too busy with school, sports, jobs, and activities that they delay personal time until bedtime. We also want to make sure that there's improved sleep hygiene. We want teens to charge their phones outside their bedroom. So in our family, when our kids are in high school on a school night, they charge their phones out in the kitchen. They don't bring it into their bedroom next to them. And also co-viewing and discussing the contents that our adolescents are watching. We're not saying that all social media is bad, but we need to be involved in what they're watching on a day-to-day basis. And as parents, we really need to make sure that we're using validation before education. So validation before education is so important. We want to validate their distress. Our adolescents are going through so much hormonal changes, and there's stresses, a lot of stresses from social to homework, at school. And so we want to really make sure that we validate their distress and what they're going through, and then offer psychoeducation later on. Otherwise, make an appointment with your child's pediatrician or their PCP, and talk about it with their primary care physician. And as parents, we need to also model our own screen time habits too. So, again, if I'm on my phone constantly, what am I modeling to my children? What am I modeling to my kids? What are they seeing me doing? So, and the same thing too, if my child overhears me saying that I think I might have a tic disorder, what am I modeling to my child as well? So is that what I want? Is that what I want my children also saying after they watch a TikTok video? They might think, oh, mom watches this TikTok video and says that she's got tics. So that must be true. So I'm going to follow and see that as being my model figure. Next slide, please. So teachers and school administrators, we know that teachers and school staff are incredibly overwhelmed and underpaid. We appreciate teachers so much and what you all do. And we know that schools are in a unique position to embed media literacy in everyday learning and not just for English class or history class. So teachers and administrators can help students with think critically about media messages and bias. They can also help kids think about digital citizenship and online safety, and that should be embedded across all subjects as well. So, and learning how to create and share responsible content. So a lot of high school students are sharing content on their phones during classes, in between classes, during the 5 minutes, and having teachers talk about like, hey, I saw you, Johnny, like recording something out there. What was that? Tell me a little bit more about that. I know that a lot of schools are moving towards like promoting a phone-free environment. So a lot of schools are doing what is called a phone bank or a designated phone locker. So they're putting their phone into that at the beginning of the school day, and they don't get that until the end of the school day. And they can only get their phone only for emergencies, or if a child has like a 504 for medication reminders and so on. Again, discussing digital content with students is so important, and observing your students' behavior too. So does my student seem more distressed lately? Does their behavior seem changed? Do they seem different than usual? And I know that a lot of times schools now are doing what is called digital monitoring in the schools. So many school districts now monitor student activity through their school's Wi-Fi. So as soon as a child steps foot into the school, they can no longer get the LTE, they have to get onto the school's Wi-Fi. And if keywords like suicide or depression, ammunition, or guns come up in their search, this immediately alerts administrators, and this triggers a safety protocol, and parents are contacted, and the student is brought in for a wellness check down to the office. And schools monitoring search items isn't just disciplinary, it's about being proactive intervention. We want our kids to do well in school and to stay focused, and we want our teachers to do what they need to do too. But if there is something that's arising or coming up regarding the child's behavioral health, we want it to be a proactive intervention. And then again, observing signs of screen overuse. Is my child sleeping in the classroom? Are they restless? Are they disengaged, and so on? Next slide, please. So what can we do in the clinical setting? So the same thing is what I've been talking about again. We're really making sure that we are observing our patients that are coming in, or clients that are coming in. Remember, we want to make sure that we validate their concerns. A lot of times adolescents, they're not, I know for my teenagers and many teenagers out there, they know it all. They know it. They don't tell me what I already know. But the truth of the matter is that they do know a lot of information, but they're still very vulnerable. And so we really want to make sure that we just validate their distress that's going on. So before we get into diagnosing them or telling them what we think their diagnosis is, we want to hear what it is that is going on with them. So we want to really make sure that we do a detailed intake, diagnostic intake, to hear about, hey, what's going on? What's going on with your day-to-day activities? We want to also make sure that we provide helpful psychoeducation, not just only for our patients, our adolescents, but also for parents too. Because sometimes parents have one idea as to what they think the diagnosis is, and the adolescent has a different idea what the diagnosis is. So the idea is that being able to talk with the parents and with the adolescent in the room. And again, we really want to be sensitive that the adolescence is there. We want to see them of course, one-on-one, but we also want to bring in parents for psychoeducation on both parts. And finally, like, we as clinicians, we can also be a catalyst for systems level change. We also can produce content. As Dr. Whiteside was saying earlier in her slide, that only 10% was from credible clinical psychologists or psychiatrists. That's only 10%, and we need to up that even more. So we as psychologists, we can we can put out videos, we can go to our children's high schools, we can go to the library, we can do talks at elementary school levels. We can give presentations and provide that psychoeducation. We can go to parent-teacher conferences and being able to have these didactic meetings with these parents so that they can hear more about what's going on, so that these conversations are happening more at home and at school. Next slide, please. And then I'm going to end it too with like strategies for short form video platforms. So we know also that these short form videos are coming in hot. You know, every platform has a way to be able to do these 30-second clip videos. But these video platforms, there needs to also be some regulation on them. It can't just be the Wild West, right? And so the first thing that we suggest is like algorithm adjustment and content moderation. So we want to demote any misleading content. So adjust the algorithm to reduce any visibility or unverified or sensationalized mental health videos, especially those that are promoting self-diagnosis or inaccurate symptom descriptions. We want to prioritize content from licensed professionals. So if I'm producing a video on TikTok, we want to prioritize that. We want to lower those ones. We want to lower those content creators who don't have any clinical background. We want to verify those who are licensed professionals, and especially with organizations too. So if APA or NIMH or NIH has a TikTok video, that we promote those instead, and that we also have like promotions from peer-reviewed educational channels. We also want to make sure that we have like flagging of AI or risky trends. So using AI machines to detect patterns in videos related to harmful behavior. So many of us have heard of like dangerous challenges, like the Tide Pod challenge that came out a few years ago, or medication or misuse, or making diagnoses or certain medications or trends glamorized. We know that on TikTok and similar platforms, they have now a required way of content creators to disclose altered content. So if it's an AI, we need to disclose if this was a voiceover or if we use AI to reproduce it. Again, the creator has to be honest and click that button. If they don't, it just is not flagged for as AI. And then pre-publication and promptness warning. We want to fact check prompts before posting. When users mention terms like ADHD, borderline personality disorder, BPD, or depression, it prompts the content creator to look at the message and encourage them to make sure that this is accurate information and that they're not, and they're using really good resources and that they're not producing things that are misleading. And we want to make sure that there's misinformation warning levels or misinformation warning labels. So adding flags to videos that discusses mental health diagnosis with disclaimers like, quote, like not a substitute for medical advice or links to verified resources. And then we also want to make sure that we also want to verify mental health content creators too. So credential verification system, we want to create like a verified mental health provider badge. So I know that on Instagram, you get a check mark if you're verified. And you know, it lets others know that you've had so many check marks or so many creators or so many people who are following you. But we also know too that many of these platforms are monetized. So if you pay tons of money to these, to your name, to your platform, that you can elevate your platform even more so you can have more users come to your site. So it's not even about being a credible professional. It's about you just wanted to promote it. So you pay $30 to promote your video on TikTok and others. And again, collaborating with other mental health organizations like NAMI, Mental Health America, APA, and so on to create informative campaigns and reliable video series. And then last but not least, reporting platforms, policy, and community guidelines updates. So we want to expand harmful content definition. So include misinformation around mental health diagnoses and treatment within harmful or dangerous content policies. And the required content disclaimers, like mandate that creators, they have to include a disclaimer if discussing symptoms, diagnosis, or advice related to mental health. So especially in first-person storytelling, or this is my diagnosis, this is a diagnosis list, that they need to disclose that there's a disclaimer on that they're only sharing about their own real-life experiences, which is valid, but it may not come from a clinical source. And so I just want to talk really quickly about a real-world example. So as I said earlier, many of you guys heard about the Tide Pod Challenge that came out in 2017. Unfortunately, as a result of that, 2 children died because of the Tide Pod Challenge. But what happened very quickly after learning about these 2 children passing away is that Procter & Gamble, who is the maker of the Tide Pods, they immediately responded to the situation. And so they launched public service announcements. So they did PSAs across all different platforms on social media and short form video platforms. And they collaborated with influencers. So they had Rob Gronkowski work with them to demystify that Do not do the Tide Pod challenge. This is incredibly dangerous. Do not do this. They partnered with the Poison Control Center. And so in case a parent would call in and their child had done the Tide Pod challenge, they asked that the Poison Control Center also work with them into making sure that kids were no longer doing the Tide Pod challenge. And then engaging directly with social platforms, that they launched their own videos as well. And then collaborating with platforms, of course, TikTok and Instagram Reels and so on, to update guidelines and flag harmful content. Next slide. So overall strategies, we really want to make sure that we help our adolescents think critically as we can. And so the key takeaways for supporting adolescents, let's help our teens evaluate credibility and spot the misinformation and distinguish between personal stories and clinical facts. 2, we want to create open spaces for teens to talk and share their stories about what they see online and validate their curiosity. We want to correct them gently. Teens are very curious and they're not just vulnerable, they want to understand, definitely. And 3, explain that its symptoms do not always equal diagnosis. Just because you have a runny nose and you have a headache doesn't necessarily mean you have COVID. It might just be allergies, right? And so it doesn't necessarily equal a diagnosis. It could, but we need to see our PCP, or we need to see a credible resource as a result of that. And so we want to make sure that we use age-appropriate language when we're discussing mental health symptoms with our adolescents. We want to direct teens to credible resources, trusted professionals, reputable websites, and we'll have a list here at the end. And TikTok and other platforms can improve their filtering and removal of these videos. We need to work really closely with these short form video platforms to say, hey, this is unacceptable. This is okay. This is not okay. We need to get rid of some of these videos because it falsifies and it is misleading, and it can get adolescents to really think about, hey, this is the diagnosis that I have, which ends up driving up our wait list from, a year to 2 years long. Okay. So we want to empower our adolescent young adults and help them navigate the content rather than fear it. Thank you so much. Next slide. We'll go ahead and turn it over back to Christian for any questions. Hopefully
Thank you. Yep, and we are just running up on time, so if anyone does have time for a few more minutes, if you want to sort of add any other questions, please feel free to do so. There is one. I'll make sure we get at least one of these questions answered in the Q&A, and it's from one of our attendees who says, one factor mentioned by the clinician's TikTok video about ADHD that was quite good was her clarification that ADHD symptoms can occur in non-ADHD individuals, I think similar to the kind of symptom versus diagnosis note you just made. It says it is the clinical level of those symptoms and daily life impairment that justifies the diagnosis. With this in mind, how do you think the neurodivergence movement plays in? The movement itself removes clinical level as the primary basis for classification, considering it embraces typology that is not merely disorder or deficiency based. And more generally, how do you suggest handling possibly positive but counter-clinical movements such as this? That was a big one. I don't know who wants to dive into that one.
I think it's worth mentioning, especially the neurodivergence movement, emphasizing that it is not part of a clinical picture, right? That it is something that is outside of diagnostics and clinical work. And honestly, I don't know enough about it, but as like someone who's a millennial online, my interpretation is that this is something that's emerged as ways for people to find each other. I think the issue becomes when folks who identify as being neurodivergent or neurodiverse believe that that's a diagnosis in and of itself. And I think as clinicians, we can embrace both, right? We can say everyone's brain is a little, quirky, a little weird. And yes, you kind of fall along this spectrum of neurodivergence, but we're not at a clinical impairment that would mean a diagnosis.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other final comments, other thoughts? There was a number, Amy, of reactions, of course, to your video.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
I think just going back to that, a lot of the comments are kind of reiterating the points that kind of stuck out to me or what I was looking for in those videos. And with the, positive one, we have degrees in the background, we have actual diagnostic criteria. What I really love is she says it doesn't mean that you have ADHD if you identify as having a lot of these symptoms. It means you need to see a provider for assessment and diagnosis. She was a psychiatrist and she was wearing a white coat, but she also self-identified. I think one of the downsides is, like the other video kind of pointed out, it's probably much more appreciative of teens to have comics in the background and your t-shirt. I did think in her second video, she wore kind of a regular t-shirt and identified as being a mental health provider. And the other comments about misrepresenting the idea of object permanence. It's funny, as psychologists, we understand that idea, but if you don't know what object permanence is and somebody gets on there and tells you this is what object permanence is, and that's obvious, misinformation. Also kind of sensationalizing things, saying it's ADHD is a superpower. It's very sexy, right? To be like, we have superpowers, let's identify with this kind of group, or with the stories of suicide and not speaking to his mom. Those are very personal stories. And, somebody in the comments absolutely kind of hit it on the button that they're very absolute, right? Like this is what we go through, and this is what we're doing. And it's very adamant and almost like a hyperbole of something, as opposed to kind of having a conversation about diagnostic criteria. So I really appreciate those comments out there. And I know we're out of time, but if you guys have any questions that you want to send to us, we're happy to field some of those in a more timely way.
Well, appreciate you all, appreciate the time that you have given us. Jen, if you want to bring up our final slides. One thing I do hope, before we get into this, of course, is that to Dr. Whiteside's point, that even this content contributes that percentage of actual credible information on the internet that we see out there. So just one final time, I want to say thank you so much to Drs. Nguyen-Driver, Whiteside, and Seay, and thank you to everyone for joining us on today's event. We do have a number of upcoming webinars, of course, in March that are still in the works, and that one is Meaning-Making Professional Black Women Facing a New Reality. So if you're a Division 46 member or have opted into our mailing list during registration, you'll receive a link to register for that when it becomes available. But our April webinar is ready to go, and that is The Egg of Dependence, Clinical Fluency in Algorithmic Coercion and AI Dependency. That is open for registration now, so if you haven't registered yet, Jennifer will put that in the link to register for that in the chat. Finally, we'll also be posting today's recording of our webinar to our YouTube channel within the next week or so. So be sure to subscribe to our channel and get notified when this recording is published so you can share it with all of your audiences and all of your networks, again, so we can increase the amount of credible information about diagnoses of different conditions with the world and with the public. So thanks again to everyone attending. Thank you again to our wonderful esteemed panel of doctors. We really appreciate your time here, and we hope everyone has a great rest of their perfect February.